weeks, and then they would go into Subic Bay and load up ordnance and go back out and rearm the carriers and such. But anyway, so I was given a new billet, and that was on board the USS Liberty, AGTR-5.
Okay.
And the USS Liberty, AGTR-5, was a communications, basically it was a spy ship, electronic intelligence. And the tour that it was supposed to take, I picked that ship up probably May 8th of 1967. And the tour it was supposed to take, we were supposed to go down to, our first port call was Rota, Spain, and then we went on down to Abidjan, Africa, and then we were to have gone on down to Luanda, Angola, and then on down to Cape Town, South Africa, and then return home. So I was feeling really good about that, but we got into Abidjan, Africa, and I pulled duty the first night, and the second night, this friend of mine, Gary Blanchard, and I went over and come back about, and I had told Gary Blanchard, I said, you know, why don't you holler my name out? Because that's one thing on the Mauna Loa, sailing with the fleet, you had to send her on a Liberty, you had to be back at midnight. These electronic communications intelligence people, they gave them, you could stay over all night, and all you had to do was report the next morning, and then they'd release you again for whatever you wanted to do. But anyway, Gary and I said, he said, no, you got to come back with me, and I said, you know, so I did. We got back at 3:30 in the morning, and the ship is making preparations to get underway. Six-Day War broke out, and unbeknownst to me, that's where we were headed. But anyway, as soon as the last man got on board, we pulled out of Abidjan, Africa, and headed up the coast, pulled into Rota, Spain for new stores, and went over there. One thing that I did, as well as a guy by the name of J.C. Colson, we smuggled booze back on board ship because you could sell it to these guys for good money. You buy it for $1 or $2 a bottle, and you get 20, 25 bucks out of a bottle. And you'd slip one in your sleeve or two in your pea coat and hang it over your shoulder and bring it back on board. But anyway, we did that, and then we were headed for the Eastern Mediterranean, and we knew that things were hot over there, and you know, we said, well, all we had was 450 caliber machine guns, and well, we're going to get a destroyer escort. That's what we were told, and about halfway over there, we had no destroyer escort, and then they said, well, planes will be within 10 minutes of you, so you have no worry. And besides that, the Six-Day War was winding down. It was in its third day or fourth day, but anyway, we arrived on station that morning, and that was on, I'd like to, if you'd pause that for just a second. I wrote on the morning of June the 8th, and I wrote this probably about the 10th.
Is this 67 still?
This is 1967, yep. On the morning of June the 8th, 1967, I was awakened approximately 3:30 in the morning by the messenger of the watch, and I was to assume the morning of the 4 to 8 underway watch. The first hour of my watch was stood on the starboard gun mount. This hour was uneventful, or at least seemed to be. The watch section rotated at 4:45, and the position that I took was that of starboard lookout. While standing on starboard lookout, the quartermaster of the watch came out and told me we had an aircraft approaching at a relative bearing of 135, range of about 6 miles. And I scanned the area and I caught sight of the plane. It was a twin-engine propeller-driven plane, and not knowing aircraft nomenclature, I can best describe it by drawing it, and I drew a little indication of what that plane looked like at that time. I informed the officer of the deck, Mr. Scott, that I had sighted the contact. He then came out on the starboard wing to verify my sighting. The aircraft was on a relative course bearing of 280, and he crossed from the starboard to port aft of the ship and then proceeded down along the port side of the ship in a position angle of about 45 degrees, range of about 4,000 yards. It made 3 runs fore and 2 runs aft in a figure 8 pattern, and it then crossed from port to starboard in front of the ship and flew over the horizon on a relative course of about 080. While the plane was making its pass, Mr. Scott came out and took a camera out of the pilot house onto the port wing and appeared to take a picture of it. Whether or not he did, I don't know. Mr. Scott was a damage control officer on board the USS Liberty.
Well, was he going to have a lot to do?
What's that?
Was he going to have a lot to do?
He did have a lot to do, and it was amazing that he kept us afloat. It really was.
Now, did this plane have any markings on it?
I don't really recall any markings on that plane.
Okay.
But this was the first sighting that we had of any of the, well, I had no idea who they would be, myself. The next hour of the watch was spent on the helm. The final half hour I spent on the port wing as a lookout. At 7:15, I was relieved and went down to the mess decks to grab a bite to eat. I walked up to quarters, and the guys there were mentioning that between the hours of 2 and 4 the previous night, the watch section had observed flashes of bombs bursting on the shore. The only point that was brought out at quarters June 8th was the fact that someone had written on the partition in the head, and as a result, deck department was supposed to hold a field day after hours. Soper, who was a friend of mine, he mentioned that he wasn't going to play their kid games and that they could take him to the old man first before he worked any extra hours. And it teed me off somewhat also, as I knew I'd be tired from the morning watch. And then Weaver asked Lucas if we were to hold general quarters again today. And he stated that he didn't know, as it wasn't listed in the plan of the day, but it was a good possibility. We were then dismissed, and Tony Quintero, my division PO, told me to go ahead and finish a high line that I was making for personnel transfer. They had told us 5 days before that we were getting the Admiral on board ship, and I was making a personnel, whenever they transfer an individual at sea, at that time anyway, that had to be done with live rigging, not cable or whatever. That had to be manned by people, and it was a rope system with this cage. But anyway, he told me to go ahead and finish this high line for that transfer. And I walked back to the filter shop, and I had a cigarette, and I proceeded on down to the line locker. And I had finished the I-splice and snap rings, and all I had left to do was measure it off to the proper length and cut it and seize the end. Well, anyway, I was going to go get Soper to help me do just that. And I came up out of the line locker. This was after the general quarters. And I came up out of the line locker, and I was walking on the port side of the ship, and I heard this loud explosion, and then deafening silence, because your ears, if you haven't, you just can't acclimate to that. And anyway, the chemical alarm attack went off then, very high-pitched dee-dee-dee. And this chemical alarm attack, the reason it went off is because there was a communications box that was hit on the forward superstructure, and that's what happened. I said, another thing I should mention, when we secured from general quarters, you could look over at the beach, and you could see the top of a minaret at El Arish. Just the very top of it, and then smoke was rolling off of that area, I don't know what it was involved, but I had mentioned to somebody, I said, this is like sitting at ringside at a Muhammad Ali fight. I said it had no idea that we would be embroiled in this. We were in international waters, plainly marked. There was maybe a 10-mile-an-hour headwind that we were going into, but anyway, when this explosion happened, over the intercom system, it said to send out a message over the HICOM net that we were under attack, and I thought, my God, Abdel Gamal Nasser has gone crazy, because you just perceived that it was the Egyptians that had done this, in retribution for, but anyway, little did we know that their Air Force had been decimated 3 days before, and they had nothing flying in the air. But anyway, these were French Mirage jets that were coming in over us. And like I say, I don't know, when I got up to my general quarters station, I looked forward through the superstructure, because I was on gun tub 54 up there, and I could see this jet coming in line with the ship, and he was dropping what appeared to be like maybe like a 6-foot irrigation tube, and it was tumbling end over end. And when it hit, well, it was napalm is what it was. It was a napalm bomb, because it had jelly in it. And I said, in the initial attack, the boat deck, which was right below me, there were, I think, 2 55-gallon drums of fuel, and I think they had been penetrated in the first. And when that napalm hit, it was a hell of an explosion. And I said, I was knocked on my back, and I said the plane went over top at that moment, and it appeared really, really close, but he may have been 100 yards above the ship. I don't know. But
could you tell he was Israeli at that point?
I couldn't. I'll tell you what.
You were laying on your back.
I was laying on my back, looking up, granted, but I said, and I said the flames were coming over the edge of my gun tub. So I went across a skylight that went all the way down into the engine room, and I went over to gun tub on 53. Which was over on the starboard side. And Mr. Lucas was over there along with about 2 or 3, he was my deck division officer, and there was about 2 or 3 other guys. And Tommy Wheeler was there. He was in, I don't know what his billet was, but Tommy said, Mr. Lucas, he said, where's our goddamn planes? And of course he had no idea.
Were you guys able to return fire?
No. Those gun tubs, basically all they were for was repel boarders. That's what they were designed for. They had retaining bars on them, so there was no way that you could swing that gun around and shoot through the superstructure. These were the tubs that were up on the superstructure themselves. So they had I don't know what you want to say. It was a retaining bar anyway that kept the ship from getting hit by its own fire. But anyway, because they, and at that time they were strafing us from forward to aft.
So there were 2 planes, right?
Well, there were at least a minimum of 2, probably 4. Probably 4. But it's just like if you would lose sight of a gnat in this room, and you'd have a hard time picking that gnat up again, especially in the commotion of what's going on, But anyway, Mr. Lucas told J.C. Colson and I to go over and douse the fires on the port side. So we went over and strung out hose and doused the fires on the boat deck and threw, mind you, flaming material over into the into the ocean. And this was while the strafing was continuing. And when we had succeeded in extinguishing those fires, went into the superstructure to an inside passageway there while they were pounding us more. And for some reason, after I had been in there for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever it was, I just felt I just had to get back up at my general quarters station. And I came out of there and I went back up the superstructure, and when I got on the bridge level, the captain stepped out of the bridge and he said, "We need volunteers up on Mount 51. And he had been hit somewhere in the leg here. He was a mass of blood from his from his waist on down, and I said, "Well, I'd go." And there was another guy up there with me, and he said that he would go with me too. And so we went down the superstructure, went across the decks up to Mount 51. And when we got up to Mount 51, it wasn't very pretty sight. Skolac had been cut in half up there. Thompson had a basketball-sized hole in his back. Sal Payon was laying there in agony because he had lost a front lobe of his head. He was a mass of blood.
Now, were they just firing machine guns at you, or were they shooting rockets?
Aerial cannon fire.
Aerial cannon fire.
Aerial cannon fire, and like I say, napalm bombs is what they were using. And in this material that's here, they get into the specifics of what was used because it was all analyzed afterward.
Sure. Yeah.
You know. But anyway,
how long did it last?
This lasted from approximately, in my estimation, I always thought it was from about 2:04 till about 2:35 to 2:40, right in through there.
Is this during the afternoon?
No,
Or early morning hours?
no, this is in the afternoon. This is in the afternoon. And when I'm saying this, the planes were only there for about 15 minutes.
Okay. Didn't take it very long.
It didn't take very long. But at this, when I saw the captain, he said, "We've got motor patrol boats approaching," and that's why he wanted me on Mount 51. And we got up there, and the mount had been hit. The ammunition that fed that machine gun, whatever the connections, I'm really not up on that gunnery nomenclature, but anyway, the belt had been blown apart. So I had to reload the gun. And I asked this guy that was with me if he would go get a gunner's mate to assist up there, and he said he would, and he left. And at this time, these boats showed up. And they were making like, well, I don't know what you would say, approach runs. I would assume that they were probably somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe half to 3/4 of a mile away. And I don't know if you'd call it like a practice run, or maybe they were launching at the time. I'm not really sure. But when the one boat, that lead boat, when it started, because the others had done this previously, when that did that, I fired one round, and the top plate blew off that gun because it had been hit by shrapnel, and the only way to fed that gun would have been one bullet at a time. But at the same moment, the Captain McGonigal yelled down. He said, "Cease fire." And I looked up at the bridge, and he was out on the starboard wing of the bridge, along with the signalman, who was signaling these boats with semaphore flags. And I ducked back down in that gun tub, and it seemed like eternity, but I was there probably only for about 5 minutes or 6 minutes. And then I crawled out of that. Well, I looked back up at the bridge and I saw no one at that point. And I crawled back across the forecastle and down the ladder. And at that time, the gun mount up there on 53, it started cooking off because it had been hit on that side, and it started cooking off too. And then the 50 caliber or the 50 millimeter guns on the motor patrol boats that were out there, they opened up, and I said it was just fire skipping off the water, basically. And I stood out there for probably a minute, looking around the corner of this, what the hell you would call it, but anyway, watching this happen. And then I went into the forecastle, and it just got into the underneath there, and that's when the torpedo hit. And the ship raised up in the air maybe like a foot or 2 foot. And you've seen in here the pictures of the hole. You know, the hole was probably 30 foot or 35 foot around this way by about 20, 25 foot. And that's where we sustained the largest amount of casualties down in there. 25 guys lost their lives.
What was the total crew on the ship? Do you know?
Total crew on the ship was 294. We had 34 killed and 171 wounded. We were attacked by Israeli air and sea forces June 8, 1967. That has never been put on anything. The mass grave up there in Arlington, they had to, there was no marking whatsoever initially. But anyway, then they put on there that they were killed in the Eastern Mediterranean. That's what it was mentioned.
And is it these 34 that were killed that were all buried, or is that just?
No, just the ones they didn't find.
Oh, okay. All right.
I can
No, sorry, you didn't.
tell you in these letters here. I'll recount some of these letters here too that I had written at the time too. Anyway.
So did you guys ever get help? Did anybody ever show up and back these people off?
No, we never did.
Did the vessel sink?
No, it didn't. It didn't. We did not sink. We were given the next day. See, the carrier America was there along with another carrier. Admiral Geiss was in charge of things there. Admiral Geiss launched a strike force to assist us. And they received this call, like I say, immediately. You know, I said, they said send out a message over the HICOM net that we're under attack. Well, they received this message right away. And he fitted a launch force, and he was told by the McNamara to withdraw those planes, bring them back. And he thought that they were of the opinion that it was that they were nuclear laden, and he called back and reassured them that that's not the case. And he said, "You're not going to, you're not going there." And he said that he asked for confirmation. He told this to David Lewis. He asked for confirmation, and the president came on the phone and said, "You're not going to."
This is President Johnson.
This is President Johnson. Yep, you are not going to. I said this new book that's coming out, the information has been found in the archives of Israel, mind you, and it's pretty damning for McNamara and Johnson. But anyway.
So how long did these PT boats attack?
They were there for, I'd say, approximately 20 to 25 minutes, and then they milled around for a period after that. I'll tell you what I did, because they called down and said, make preparations to abandon ship. And I begged for somebody to help me to go up and get Sal Peon out of Mount 51. I knew that guy was up, knew he was alive. And the guys that were down there near the superstructure said, everybody's dead up there. And I said, no, he's not. And we went up there with a canvas, and we hauled him back down to the chief's quarters that was right on the main deck in the superstructure. And that was a triage unit, as was our mess decks. Anyway, like I say, Sal Peon had what I was mainly concerned about, other than his massive head wound, was the fact that he had a sucking hole in his side. And I didn't know whether to put him on that side to drain it, or to put him on the other way.
So he bleeded.
Yeah, so he wouldn't drown in his own blood.
Sure.
But anyway, I was with him for probably 15 or 20 minutes in there, in that triage area.
Does somebody ever show up to help bail you guys out, or?
No, not until the next morning. Approximately after I came out of there, then here came a Israeli helicopter, very visible, with commandos on board, and they dropped I don't know, it was a bag, and they said there was a note in there with an orange in it, and said, do you have any casualties? And this was from an American military attaché, and you can see the dead people on the decks. This was from an American military attaché that was in Tel Aviv. And he stated in one of the videos, in a British video, he said, well, it's absurd. The Israelis could have sank that ship with, how did he say that? With rouge de guerre or esprit de corps or whatever. And I said, that made me so damn mad. Yeah. You know.
And where were you guys positioned at that point? Where did this take place?
This took place
in Israel, or
off of the Sinai Peninsula, off of El Arish. Like I told you, I said I saw the minaret at El Arish. And we were approximately 12 to 14 miles off it. And I said we were steaming probably, well, when we got under attack, they put everything, because we were just idling along prior to that. But when we were under attack, they probably cranked it up to where they were going 12 to 15 knots or whatever. And like I say, we were going into a headwind. You know, and they say that, well, you were obscured by the smoke. I said, yeah, that was baloney, because I said, you know, that the smoke was streaming off to the rear of that ship, you know what I mean? But I said, like I say, this helicopter showed up, and the captain says, go to hell, get out of here, because he was up on the bridge. And I said, they left, and then we didn't see anybody till the next morning. USS Davis pulled up alongside of us. And I said, no matter what, I had a very close friend, Gary Blanchard, that died on the operating table at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I said, at best, you know, we had medical treatment within 15, 20 minutes of us. But nobody came. I always felt betrayed. And, but anyway,
so I went back. Davis shows up, and what do they do then?
What's that?
USS Davis shows up, and then what do they do?
Well, they helped transfer the wounded, and they took the dead bodies off, which were, you know, which they were capable of, the ones that were up above anyway.
Did they tow the ship?
What's that?
Did they tow the ship into a dry dock?
Yeah, we headed, that one of my letters here makes reference to that. They said we were going to go to Sudabe, Crete, for just temporary fix, and then to head into Malta to dry dock. But anyway, I went back aft with my division fellows that were left.
Sure.
And we had to man the hydraulic pumps, which we pumped by hand, manually pumped by hand. And then we had phone, and the engineering compartment, they were able to get the boiler back online, and we limped out of that area. But anyway, we, like I say, the next morning then, the USS, when I came around, the USS Davis was tied up alongside, and we were getting help transferring people off. They put a net over the hole because they didn't want any of this, any of the cryptology stuff, and they didn't want the bodies floating out of there. And we were, an ocean-going tug accompanied us then on into Malta, and then we went into dry dock there.
And when was that, you said that was toward the end of your time in the Navy?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
okay, so they never gave you guys any explanations.
Well, we got into Malta, and Admiral Kidd came down, and he explicitly told crew members we weren't to say anything to anyone, not the press especially, and that they would do all the talking. Anybody had any pictures, anything like that, it was confiscated if they were. But I have seen pictures that people kept and
You
such.
said the one guy had a camera that he took of the planes.
He took, yeah, yep. And there are pictures in this book here.
Okay.
Our James Ennis was an officer on board, and he wrote this in about 1978 or 79, and it gives a ship's accounting.
Would you say that all of the survivors from the Liberty believe, as you believe, that it was the Israelis that strafed this Liberty?
Oh, well, that's proven fact.
Proven fact now.
Oh, sure.
You weren't supposed to talk about it.
Oh, no.
The other thing, because I read one of the articles that somebody did on you, and they said that they didn't recognize.
Oh, they said it was a mistake.
Well, they didn't recognize the valor of the seamen who were on that boat until years later. Was that right?
Oh, I have no idea. I've never read any accounting of Israeli documentation of this. But anyway, it's coming on out. So I'll read you.
When did you get your Silver Star, though?
When did I get it? A year and a half later.
Year and a half later. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
And how did that make you feel about your military experience?
What's that?
How did that make you feel about your military experience?
Like the rest of these guys. Here's an article that came out in the Chicago Tribune. This is a front page article, October 2nd of last year. And this is document text. Bryce Lockwood, Marine Staff Sergeant, there were 2 Marines that were killed, but he was a Russian language expert, and he was a recipient of the Silver Star for heroism. Ordained Baptist minister is shouting into the phone, "I'm angry, I'm seething with anger. 40 years and I'm still seething with anger." But anyway, I'll read you these letters.
I have about 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well,
Is there a part of one of the letters you want to read?
well, I was just going to recount.
And,
I said it was a sad day when we went down and retrieved 25 bodies out of that hole.
Oh, yeah. Well, and you still have maintained relationships with some of the crew members, right?
Well, I didn't want anything to do with any of it up until, like I say, in later years. And I said, I had a trouble time dealing with all this. It was Had it not been for the gal I married and my getting back into athletics, I could have gone a real hard way.
How long were you in the military after this?
I got out in December, 1st of December.
Of 67?
Of 1967. I started back to school on the GI Bill then.
Okay.
And I graduated out of February Junior College and then Hastings College.
How do you think this event affected your life overall?
I would just as soon have not experienced this.
Okay. Your life would have been much better if you had.
Well, a lot of things are ordained. Everything, I have a strong belief in God, and I think all things work for good to them that love God. I want to read this statement here. Government is not reason, it is not eloquent, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. And that's a quote from the father of our country, George Washington. And with that, I'll end our interview.
So do you think your military experience influenced your thinking about war or about the military in general? You can just say yes or no, you don't have to tell me what. Do you think it has influence?
Oh yeah, it definitely has.
Okay.
I tell you, here in here, I received your letter from the 12th today. Dear Mom and Dad, my letter should have gotten home either the 12th or the 13th, as we sent out the first class mail on the 10th. I could have sent a telegram the 11th, but decided against it. I think you know why. Because they monitored all communication like that.
Sure.
We pulled into Valletta Mall the Wednesday morning and got into the dry docks that afternoon. That evening and through the night, we got the boys out that had been trapped down below where the torpedo hit. Found 25 in all. It was a pretty sorry day. Somebody up there must look out for me, as out of the 8 new guys that came on ship and into the deck division, I'm the only one that's left. Lost some close buddies that day. All in all, out of 28 guys in the deck division, there are 9 left on board. I saw J.D. Anderson today, and he was all right. Supposed to be here 15 days to patch the ship up and head stateside, so should get back around the middle of July. Do take care, and please don't worry, as I'm all right. The only hurt I have is inside, and only time will let me forget. Love, Butch.
Well, we'll just start out clean, and I want to thank you for your service to your country.
Thank
you for doing the interview.
Okay.
Because a lot of people might not want to revisit
Well,
memories.
I didn't want to revisit this. And I said, going back and meeting with those guys in 2003 down in Nebraska City, that was a healing experience.